What's good, y'all? John Cat Show, episode 60. Thank you so much for tuning in. Keeping these going. It's the third one. It should be coming out on a Thursday. This will be the third Thursday in a row. I would tell you that Thursday is going to be my day, but then I won't release on a Thursday, and I'll be like, I said I was going to do Thursdays. But in any case, I am sticking with it more consistently now, and I hope you guys are enjoying these. And they've been really great for me, and I've been getting out a lot of rants that I've had rolling around in my head for a while, and it feels really nice. And to that regard, I wanted to follow up on a couple things from last episode and such. What I've been finding is, like I was just saying, and ironically, even something that I was talking about last week in relation to quieting your mind, is that when you say things out loud, it really does allow you to release them. It's a much different thing. You could think about a thing a million times, but it's a whole different universe when you say it out loud. There really is some sort of physical release there. And I mentioned it in regards to this show and also some advice about, voice memoing yourself and listening to it back. I used to hate listening to my own voice when I first started this, but from making clips of it, I end up watching basically the whole episode because I put clips out on social media and stuff like that. And I've really gotten used to hearing myself. But then what's interesting, it evolved into even something further, which is what I was just talking about. For me, this is just, it's very much like a personal voice journal, for lack of a better term. And there is something else that even happens when I hear it back. Because a lot of times I'm just going along stream of consciousness and I don't even really think so much about what I'm saying. And then I go, oh, I really articulated that to myself well. It really is an interesting way to have a conversation with yourself, which is something I talk about a lot in relation to this and the inner bonding stuff and all of that. So I really think that stuff is great. And then also the episodes spark conversations with people in my life, and it helps me evolve a thought myself. It has all sorts of benefits. So yeah, you'll often see me go back and follow up and touch on things I said the previous week before I get into content for this particular episode. And there are a couple things I talked about last week that I did want to touch on really quick. And then I'm going to get into some new stuff this week. I'm going to be talking about time and the present moment. I've done an episode on time before. This is more specifically geared toward what it means to actually to live in and to be in the present moment. And it's something I allude to in a lot of episodes, and it's something that I do a lot of mini rants on, but I really wanted to put some cohesive thoughts together on it. And like I was just talking about before, I like to flush these rants out of myself. It's a great feeling. And it really does advance my thoughts and understanding on particular topics. I love it. And then I'm also doing another list. If you've been watching, I've been doing my top 5 or top 10 favorites of things at the end of the show. I'm going to be doing my top 5 favorite guitarists, lead guitarists. I've done a lot of, music episode countdowns, bands, songs, singers, etc. But I've not done any instrumental people. And I'll do more of those, some drummers and some bass players and stuff. But this is going to be lead guitarists, my top 5 favorite, and that'll be coming up at the end. So yeah, one thing I wanted to follow up on, I've been talking a lot about the last couple episodes, is a lot of the framework of what it means to be masculine and feminine and all these relationship gurus and all the advice you hear, and was offering my takes on a lot of that stuff. And I happened to be watching one of these dudes, one of the guys that actually sparked that whole rant in the first place, which is stuff I'd been thinking about for a long time. But this guy really epitomizes like the caricature of what's going on and what, in my view, is wrong with the constructs and the framework that these people are creating in relation to gender ideology and all these relationship advice and all this type stuff. So I talked a lot about what it means to be masculine and what it means to be a man. And by the way, these are a lot of people I see giving similar advice, which is these are men talking about men's emotions, and they say, that's not a masculine thing to examine your inner self and emotions too much, that's a feminine thing, and that women should be the ones, journaling and writing or reading poetry and all these types of things. And that men's job is different, that the male biology, and listen, I don't know what was going on in caveman times or even much more recent history, but I can only speak to the reality in which we live in today and my perception of what's going on. And he went on to say that, men should only examine that stuff to a point where they're not destructive, because we have this natural tendency for violence and destruction and things like that. So we should examine ourselves just enough so that we're not hurting people, and then leave the rest to the women. And this is specifically saying, if a woman's off journaling and she's in her feminine energy, you should be doing Excel sheets and things of that nature. And just, my first thought was, well, shit, we wouldn't have any great art barely. I'm not knocking female artists, but if you look at some of the, in my opinion, the majority of the greatest art that's ever been created, from paintings to sculptures to poems to novels and books of all sorts to music, movies, you name it. If there weren't men examining their emotions over all of human history, they never would have come close to getting to a place to creating any of that. So that's just number one, right off the bat, first thought. But then a much deeper thought I have about all that is, if you think of life as a set of experiences, and you listen, remove the spiritual part for now. I've talked a lot about my personal belief in souls being eternal, and there's a lot of versions of that, religion and spirituality and everything else. But even if you remove that part, just for argument's sake, if you look at life, it's a collection of experiences. And what is an experience? What is a memorable or meaningful experience? I often say a meaningful experience is one that you remember, so those go hand in hand. But what makes a memorable experience? What makes something feel meaningful? Without the feelings and the emotions associated with an experience, it'd be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to even define that experience. 3 people could experience the same exact set of circumstances. 2 of them never think about it again and don't remember it for the rest of their lives. And maybe for one, it's so impactful that it changes their life and sets them on some completely different path. And it's as meaningful as it can get. Maybe they were watching a speech where someone said some inspirational line. 2 people are barely paying attention or they're looking at their phone. But for one person, it sparked this thing inside of them. But just look at it generally speaking. The way you feel is what defines, and I'm going to be talking a lot about the present moment, it defines your very existence. So what you're thinking and what you're feeling defines all of what's going on. But if you think about the things that you remember now and the things that you'll remember for the rest of your life until you're on your, if you think about all of that stuff, what made it memorable? What made it rare? What made it special and rare enough to stick out in your mind? It was the emotional experience associated with it. So my argument to these people that say men shouldn't go to that place, well then my question is, what's the point of life? So that you can say, I accomplished X, Y, and Z, or I gathered X, Y, and Z, and I attained all of these things. And either you're doing that so you can look at yourself with satisfaction, or you're doing that so that you can impress other people, or some combination of the two. And I'm not saying that gaining and acquiring things isn't extremely valuable. And it often leads to the freedom and the ability to even do these other things. So I'm not knocking people achieving things and doing hard work or anything else. That stuff's amazing. And we need all the hardworking, dedicated people we can get. So I don't want to conflate those two things. But what I'm saying is this. And it's funny because the guy specifically mentioned spreadsheets. And I've mentioned this before, which is you won't remember working on that spreadsheet, right? When you're 85 years old and you're on your deathbed, you're not going to remember the spreadsheet that you were working on in 2024. It just, unless you had some emotional experience associated with it. Now, you will remember that game you went to with your dad or whoever. You'll remember that amazing concert you went to. You'll remember that poem that you read that really moved you. You'll remember that song you heard that really moved you. You'll remember that amazing book. You'll remember that amazing movie. I talked about our movies and Netflix series and things. Mindless is that cheap surface stuff. If it allows you to have some sort of emotional experience and it becomes a memorable thing and you remember it for the rest of your life, I can't see how something that, now a lot of it is obviously complete garbage, but I can't see how something that sticks with you in such a deep way can constantly be misconstrued as something meaningless. And the idea that going to that place and wanting to have those meaningful, emotional, memorable experiences, the idea that that's somehow feminine and that you're only masculine if you're hyper-focused on being a provider and a leader and being stoic and hammering out Excel sheets and all this stuff. Like, give me a fucking break. Anyone I see talking like that comes off as the most insecure human on earth, period. And again, without that stuff, what's the point of life? What is an experience without the emotional attachment to it? Now, speaking of the spirituality part, I could maybe see, here's something that I find in common with most of these people is they're all very science-based, calculation based. I always talk about these calculations everybody's doing. It's all very, what can I see in front of me? It's all very overly practical. And what goes along with that, you'll notice with all these people, is atheism. Now, by the way, side note, I've noticed in my own life people that say they're atheist. If I say, are you atheist or are you agnostic? Because there's a big, and I don't know the full technical definitions, but I always view it as, to me, there's a very clear delineation. People that believe this is it, this earthly construct, this human construct, this is it. One day it's over, the lights go out, it's black, there's nothing else. Those are true atheists, in my opinion. It's not that they don't believe in God, it's that they don't believe our souls are eternal, and that's just the hugest distinction ever. Now, agnostic people, as I understand it, and maybe I'd kind of fall into that category, as someone who identifies and has always, we've never been religious as a family or me personally or anything else, but we are Jewish. I do believe in God, right? But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know what God means based on the structure of a specific religion. But if you look at any organized religion or any spirituality, any version of that, any Eastern philosophy, all that stuff, it's all some version of, it's not just this life here on earth. Our souls are eternal, whether there's an afterlife of heaven and hell, whether you're reincarnated, all that, obviously up for huge debate. Nobody could tell you any of that for sure. And again, for me, just simply the fact that we exist and have consciousness is already, I'll say again, proof enough of an eternal soul. And that's not a thought I can articulate or convince anyone of. I guess that's why people call it faith. And I guess I have my own blended version of things that I believe based on my own perceptions, and who the hell even knows? But so that to me, it separates everybody. You have the people that believe our souls are eternal, and then you have the people that believe the lights just go out and we're done. I find that the vast majority of people that speak the message that I'm kind of trying to dispel here, they're all, the lights go out one day and you're done, overly practical people. Because, well, you can't prove to me anything else. We're just here spinning around in this rock. Unless science can prove it to me, I don't want to hear it. That's their viewpoint. And I can see and understand how, if that was somebody's viewpoint, that the lights just go out, they would be very into the gathering and the attaining things and the status of it all and the perception of just what we can see and prove here with this humanly structure. Because they wouldn't put much emphasis on the meaning and the emotion, because to them, why would that even have any meaning? And you often hear people argue the opposite, but when you really sit and think about it, because they'll say, well, if there is this, you just have this one life, you got to make the most, there is nothing else, blah, 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 blah. And I always say the idea that the soul is eternal is way more reason to make it all count now, because it counts toward such a much bigger picture, a much bigger, more important, more meaningful picture. If the lights just went out, then that to me is the throwaway. That to me is, okay, well, let me just live in this. What can I attain? All within this materialistic human construct. And why would anything else matter? In fact, even from a moral and ethical standpoint, you could, why would forget even the punishment of heaven and hell, if we continue on, and if these are things that we now carry with us for eternity, arguably, then they count way more than if we just go into the ground and the lights go out and it's as if we never even existed, which to me is preposterous, but I understand why people with that sort of brain feel that way. But for them to then take that internal limitation that they have on themselves of love and creativity and passion and romance and all these things that are under the surface, for them to limit themselves in that way, but then for them to impose it on everyone else and say, this is how you should be. That's why I keep ranting about it. That's why it bothers me so much. And these are not limited incidents. This is how I think a lot of people feel. And from what I see, it's how a lot of people are living and experiencing their lives. And it makes me really sad. It makes me sad people feel that way. And it makes me sad people are then taken advantage of in that way by people who are just kind of expressing their own internal conflict and cynicism. And think about that kind of in reverse in this regard, not to get all dark and talk about, I mentioned suicides and stuff last week in relation to men feeling things and how much we bottle stuff inside to the point that we can't even stand to live anymore. But think about suicide in this regard. These people that place all the importance on the attaining of things and the perception of success within this construct of here's what society says success is, and this is what people recognize as being successful. And that if you're a man, you should only focus on these things, etc., etc. Look how many successful men who've achieved the highest peaks of their given fields and passions take their lives. Endless musicians that I think about all the time, from Chris Cornell to Kurt Cobain and everyone else, and even a lot of the overdoses and stuff. Semantical maybe, but that's all kind of a form of suicide as well, when you're just in a state of having that little regard for being alive and you're numbing and poisoning yourself to that point. It's pretty much the same thing. Look at a guy like Anthony Bourdain. The list goes on and on. If you said to young Anthony Bourdain, what's your passion? Food. What would you love to be doing? Traveling the world, experiencing all these cuisines, sharing my thoughts with people, sharing foods with different people and cultures. He would have told you he wanted to be doing exactly what he's doing, or some version of that. And the guy was like 60 years old when he took his life, which is crazy to think about too, right? And in the regard that, see what I'm saying? He achieved everything he could have ever, if you're talking about it from that practical standpoint, from that male guru standpoint. You go, okay, take Anthony Bourdain, right? Guy worked his ass off. The guy made a fortune. He had all the money in the world, all the means and resources to do anything he wanted and go anywhere he wanted. Adored and respected and achieved the pinnacle of success in the exact field and the exact thing he's so passionate about. You go 60 years and then you get to a point, well, now it's too painful to even live anymore. And again, there's a million degrees of that. There's a million degrees of people who forget taking your life, but people who are just completely miserable, and people who are severely depressed, and people who have all this internal conflict that they've had buried inside them since they were babies. And so when you tell me, oh, men shouldn't explore those things, men should just be working on spreadsheets, the woman should be journaling, they should only be doing it to a point where they're not violent and destructive. No, fuck off with that stuff. I say, what about Anthony Bourdain, and what about the other hundreds of millions of dudes who were just numbing themselves out every day with alcohol and drugs and are barely hanging on by a thread and just pushing through with every ounce of strength they have? And then they see you guys saying, just tough it up, be masculine. Like, nah, fuck you guys. If that guy was more willing, if those people suffering were willing and able, it's figuring out how to even do it is a lifelong journey. You're telling them not to even attempt it. But if those guys were somehow able to get to a place where they could do that work of going inside where they should and figuring that stuff out and then releasing it, maybe a lot of them still be around. Maybe a lot of them wouldn't be killing themselves with substances. And that's why I find you guys bullshit on that so fucking offensive. And what's worse is it's intellectually dishonest because these people know better, because they're such insecure. See, that's the thing. They experience all these fears and emotions and worries and stuff, but they have this knee jerk of, well, I got to be a man. And now I'll get on there and I'll tell other people and I'll get validation. I'll get people coming back to me like, yeah, thanks, alpha guy. Thanks for making me feel manly. The dudes perpetuating those stupid messages, they should be the ones doing the inner work most of all. And here's the thing too, like for me personally, I could be as practical as anybody. It's imagine being just stuck in that one, I'm manly mode and I don't go out of it, even for my wife or girlfriend or loved ones. I'm Mr. Masculine. Nobody's more insecure than that dude. There's a place to be that. There's a place to be practical. Like I said, if you have to defend yourself, if you have to defend your loved ones, if you have to defend your property, if you have to protect yourself from harm of all forms, from physical harm to being ripped off to having things stolen from you to just standing up for yourself in general in situations that matter, of course you should be. That's like, it goes without saying. That's what I mean. It's such a simple sentence. You know what it feels like to be a man. You know what it feels like to stand up for yourself and to embrace that stuff and just be in that mode. It's like, it's such a simple statement. We don't have to pick it all apart and start limiting ourselves in all these weird ways and all these people just projecting their own insecurities onto everybody else. And yeah, with transactional stuff, I'll be as practical as needed too. You want me to negotiate on buying a new car or something? If I'm getting a water heater, of course. Am I going to negotiate the best deal? Yeah. Make sure the dude's not ripping me off. Make sure the guy's licensed and make sure he's permanent. Of course. And that's the thing. We have to do all that calculative, hard bullshit all day in our regular lives. Why would you now bring that home into your most meaningful interpersonal relationships? These people that you're closest with in the world, the only people that you have the luxury. What are loved ones for if not being able to open up and be vulnerable around and be ourselves without all that machismo shit that we actually do need out in the real world in many cases? When it comes to that stuff, everyone should just harness my dad. And my dad just embodies me all the time now anyway, so it's almost, but I've always my whole life. If there's ever a situation, I go, just be dad for a minute. Nobody was a harder ass in situations where he needed to be. And when needed, yeah, men should be like that. But again, that goes without saying. And the other example of where you should just kind of handle people is when it doesn't matter. This is a totally different thing than the example a second ago about having to stand up and protect. But you are kind of protecting yourself with boundaries, having boundaries. That's a real thing. So there's a ton of those cases too. It could be your actual friend, your family member, your parent, your sibling, your kid, what have you. Well, kids might be another thing. And I don't have kids. I'll actually add that caveat in a second. I think kids who are younger, who are not adults, they are obviously the only exception to this, where you should be worried about other people in such a way because they're your children and they're minors, and it requires you to, in my opinion, give them a level of caring and energy and engagement that you would not have to give to anyone else in society, including other family members. Because a person can be a family member or a loved one, and it doesn't matter to your life in that way. If something doesn't matter to your life, don't give it all that crazy emotional vault for what? Unless you're actually going to change somebody in that case or change their path or something, which is extraordinarily rare. Yeah, my main method of handling people who I know and who I love in cases where it doesn't matter to me at all, it's not going to affect my life and it's not going to affect their life either, right? Meaning they're on some whole conflicted thing of their own, but there's nothing I could say or do that's A, going to change their mind or perception, and B, I have no skin in that game either. It's not going to affect me either. So in those cases, yeah, my main method of handling is to smile and nod and say no problem, and then I go on about my life. And that's a really good boundary I think everyone should have, and it's very freeing. I was just having this conversation the other day, which is the 99.9% of the stuff people get upset about and feel conflicted about, it has to do with other people. What are other people feeling and doing and thinking and saying? And you'd be hard pressed to find an exception to that. Look at your friend or family member who's always venting to you about something. And I guarantee you the thing they're venting about is based on what someone else is up to. Now, if they're venting to you about their sciatica or something, that's a whole different, then it's about them, okay? And that type of stuff's the exception. Mostly people are venting to you about, can you believe what Deborah did, and yada, yada, fucking yada. And you don't need to suck yourself into that and it's hard enough managing our own selves and fixing I'm not going to give a whole long rant about it because I talk about it all the time, but don't take that stuff on for yourself. Okay, so all that stuff's the exception to everything that I said a few minutes ago when it comes to being open and vulnerable versus like just purely transactional and handling somebody. But again, that's not what's being advised. People are giving this advice as how to be with your spouse or your girlfriend and things of that nature. And it's really all just very misdirected and counterproductive. And it just goes against something I feel on my core of the meaning of life and taking it back to what I was talking about, what our experiences are. And yeah, we can go through life all numbed out and detached and just forcing ourselves to go through the motions of stuff. Sure. But why would you do that? Because it's perceived as masculine to do? That's insane. So that was a long follow-up. I want to follow up on I don't even know. Am I going to get to my whole rant about being in the present, which is this episode? And I've been saying I'm doing it for 3 episodes. I don't know. Listen, ironically, the whole point of that rant is just be in the moment. Say what you feel, all that kind of stuff. So hey, if I don't get to it, I don't get to it, and I'll just keep teasing it, and I'll go on and keep fleshing out all this other previous stuff that I want to put a finer point on. Because here's a thought that I've been having as well, and relates to a discussion I was having also, and I've been talking so much about authenticity the last couple episodes. I'm sure you're sick of it. But this is a thought I've often had for a very long... It's something that everybody experiences, and I wanted to try to articulate it in this forum here. I'm sure you guys will understand what I'm talking about. I want to flesh this thought out. I talked a lot about authenticity too as it relates to social media and Twitter, and this is where I see it the most and I have seen it the most for a long time now, which is this. The main form of intellectual dishonesty or inauthenticity, if you want to call it that, because to me it's the same thing, or it's one version of that thing, is that people will argue and debate with you only within this fake semantical construct that they've created. It's this whole who me fake bullshit that they pretend that they don't know what they're actually saying, or that they pretend that everybody doesn't understand the underlying and overall reality, that this one little thing they said only exists in a vacuum. Here's some good examples of it. I notice it a lot with the Jew bashing stuff, because you have these large anti-Semitic accounts and they'll say stuff to the effect of, well, not even going into all the detail. Let's say they make a criticism of Israel and something about Zion, but it's got a little tinge of something in there. And all their little minion followers come in, and if you read the replies, it's all Hitler was right, and it's disgusting memes of like the caricature evil Jew guy and all that stuff. It's just inundated with all that stuff because that's who follows them, that's who likes them, that's who replies to all their stuff. And obviously they know that and they notice that. And then so they'll also have a lot of people coming in and saying, you're a hateful piece of shit, right? But their reply and their retort and then their follow-up tweets on their timeline are always, hey man, you can't say anything about Israel or Zionists without everyone thinking you hate Jews. Like, what the hell? All I said was X, Y, Z. And then they lay out the specific, carefully worded, crafted, manipulated construct where they can pretend that no broader reality exists other than these exact words they said. And so how dare you make these assumptions? Where meanwhile, the reality is crystal fucking clear to anybody with half a brain. But they'll only debate you with what's on paper, right? Or what they think they can prove on paper, or what they think you know about whatever. That doesn't, because there's an example of this in real life too. This is a nuanced one, right? Which is, this is how people will also debate you in real life, even in interpersonal relationships, right? Let's say there's a couple and one of the people in the relationship did something wrong, and the other person thinks or knows they did something wrong, but they can't quite prove or don't have the details. And the other person knows that they don't have these details. So the other person will stand on ceremony and say, how could you possibly be upset with me for X, Y, and Z? Based on this construct that we can only argue or debate within what I know that you know and what's been established. Where meanwhile, everyone knows the broader reality, and you end up in these intellectually dishonest, inauthentic arguments and debates. Does that make sense? Because I had this thought the other day, and I thought, I see this all day. I see it in real life. I see it on social media. I see it everywhere. And it's the epitome of intellectual dishonesty. And in my opinion, it leads to all these inauthentic interactions that people are having all day. And a lot of times you don't even want to call someone on their BS because it's like, you're just too numb and tired of dealing with that shit anyway. And people aren't going to go, oh, you know what? You're right. You called me on my bullshit and you're right. Nobody cops to that. People get defensive. They come in with some other bullshit. You end up in this whole other circular thing. Unless I think calling them on the thing, again, unless it's going to accomplish something, unless it's going to change somebody's life somehow or be meaningful in any sort of way. Because otherwise you're just expending energy where you could be using it on so many better things. And listen, I've been guilty of it also, right? I've been on the other end of it. I've for sure done a lot of what I'm talking about too. So this sounds like I'm sitting up here on my high horse and so forth. Like I said, a lot of the stuff I talk about is because of personal experience, either on the receiving or the other end of it and what have you. If it's in my head, it's either something that I'm seeing going on in real time, either in my life, with family, with friends, with social media, or it's something that I've experienced and I'm working through fleshing out the thoughts on as well, which is why it's on my mind and why I have a lot of these thoughts in the first place. Something else I wanted to follow up on, I was talking about, I think 2 episodes ago, and it ties into one of my main rants also about people not taking things so personally, but I was discussing it in the regard of the message I hear all day about actions over words and that only results matter, and that if you apply that too far across the board when it comes to your personal relationships, it can actually be misguided or short-sighted. And so I saw this video the other day. It was one of these women psychiatrists, life coach, female, whatever. Listen, not all these people are terrible. A lot of them say great things. I'm not against it. there's actually a couple people that I find myself agreeing with everything they say. And not that I follow any of these people closely, but I scroll Twitter and TikTok and Instagram, and I see videos of these people. And I find myself agreeing with a lot of it. And this woman has a huge following, and she does a ton of stuff on different disorders and anxiety disorders and avoidant behavior and all that stuff. But this particular clip came up, and she said, and it's funny when people just articulate something so much more clearly and concisely than you. Like, it's something I rambled on about for 5 minutes, and then within 2 sentences, she kind of just summed it up. But she was essentially saying, I believe she opened the video by saying that, quote, if he wanted to, he would, is possibly the worst advice she's ever heard on the planet. Meaning this only based on what people do, and words don't matter unless the actions back it up. You hear that all day. And by the way, that is true for a ton of people in situations too. So I'm not even saying this is the norm. In fact, the stuff I'm talking about is probably the exception, or it is the exception. And in this case, I believe she's specifically talking about people that have different variations of avoidant personality characteristics, I don't know. I don't like the word disorder. There's a lot of gray area in a lot of these things, but people who have avoidant tendencies, which is something obviously I can relate to. Okay. But she goes, the idea that you think, oh, the fact that this person likes me enough, well, that should just be a magic bullet. They should just be able to now flip a switch and free themselves from this lifetime of baggage and shit that they've been buried under and could never figure out before. But, oh, well, now that I really like her, I'm falling in love with this person. Well, I'm cured. It won't affect the way that I interact with them. I can just do whatever I want now, you know? So it was nice to see that articulate. I like that she had a large female audience and was kind of saying, hey, don't be so short-sighted. Now, she did go on to say, and this is true too, she went on to say, hey, it doesn't mean that you should just put up with anything either. You know, if that person is like that, where for whatever reason, they can't take the actions necessary to do the stuff that would be necessary to have a healthy relationship with them, or the stuff that you need in life, then of course, it's still a deal breaker, right? And yet, just, you know, it doesn't coincide with this place and time, but not to conflate that with the part of, well, it's all about me. I should take it personally. It's a reflection on me. And that's the part I was trying to parse out, which is if you look at other people's behavior and you say, well, they say these things, but then if you look at their actions don't match. But it is a very surface, short-sighted way to view that stuff. Now, again, 99.999% of the population doesn't matter enough to you or to your life to even go to that place. So, of course, I don't have the time to sit there and factor in all this shit about almost anyone I know. But yeah, probably a couple people in your life where that should obviously be taken into deep consideration. And I do apply that with a lot of people in my life. And I've accepted the vast array of issues that a lot of people that I love have. And not that that stuff doesn't get to me or irk me or disappoint me. But listen, my shit, I'm sure, gets to them sometimes and constantly disappoints them. And they still love and accept me no matter what, too. So that's for sure a two-way street, right? And then another point she was making in a different video, there was actually another guy, similar message, and another thing from a male's point of view. And he was saying, hey, look, he was actually speaking as an avoidant personality person, which is, here's the distinction, is that sure, maybe that person's not doing and hasn't done and won't do certain things that somebody with a different set of issues may do, or something someone just may do anyway, right? But they were saying that that avoidant personality does really love you, right? And in fact, that people with those specific type of personalities, there's almost even more weight in what they say because they're so afraid to put themselves out there in that way, in a committal, vulnerable kind of way, because as an avoidant, the more stuff you say, the more stuff you commit to, that really gets at the trigger of those weird internal mechanisms and false beliefs that start going off like alarms, right? So when that person says something loving or meaningful to you, they mean it. Whereas they were saying, you know, and here's one that's way overused, with the narcissistic personalities, which there's obviously a million varying degrees of too. And obviously you can have traits of narcissism without having the full disorder, which who even knows now what that even means. It's been so picked apart and misused. But that with the true narcissistic personality, that they don't actually love you. But that the avoidant people and the narcissistic people, from an action standpoint, do a lot of the same actions, which is they close off and kind of go away when you need them. But as I pointed out in the previous episode, if you're someone who's avoidant and you're in those moments where you can't show up for people, nobody feels worse than that person sitting there not showing up. And whether they'll ever admit to it or cop to it or whatever, no one feels worse than that person about it. No, I don't know. I can't relate. They say a narcissist doesn't care. I'd like to think I'm not one of these narcissists, but I can't relate to that idea that they'd be sitting there just la-di-da like they don't care, or even getting some sort of satisfaction out of the fact that they're not being dependable for you or playing some weird game or something like that. But I could tell you, anytime that I've avoided stuff that I should have been there for, it's the worst feeling in the world. And you'll ruminate about, I talk about the rumination and the mind. Those specific times get ruminated on more than anything, because there's so much self-disappointment associated with that type of thing. And this, why couldn't I just defeat it? Especially when you're in a different moment. And this is a lot of the stuff I want to get to. But when you're in a different moment, they say hindsight 2020. But even more than that, when you're not experiencing the exact emotions of a moment, it's very hard to replicate what was I thinking and feeling at that time, because right now that makes no sense to me. And then that becomes a very difficult thing to grapple with and to reconcile. All right, so yeah, I want to get to living in the present. I would just say, as it relates to, just to put a kind of a cap on all that follow-up stuff, whether it's, love or connections or things that naturally move you, you can't define music and the way that that makes you feel, but they will define it, right? That's kind of what I'm getting. You look at something like love, they'll even go so far as to scientifically, well, in the first 2 weeks, you're releasing 29% more dopamine, and then the oxytocin comes in at month 5, and it's like, bro, get the fuck. What do you think all that stuff is? They'll break the music down, science. Well, the reason you're feeling this thing is they're using this scientific formula to elicit this other thing. Come on, man. I would just say, don't shy away from that stuff that hits you somewhere deep inside that's inexplainable. And as a guy, don't have a knee-jerk to it, thinking, oh, that's not masculine or whatever other silly thing. And just as a human being, understand, and this is a good segue into the next thing, that the thing you are feeling and thinking in the moment defines the very experience itself. Here's a funny little silly side story that I was telling somebody the other day. Here's a great example of something that you feel in the moment being memorable or standing out to you. And this is not related to the other stuff I was talking about, but it still makes the point, which is, I was probably about 7 or 8 years old in Virginia. One of my friends was over, Daniel, and I had this motorcycle toy. You guys probably remember these, where it had like a zip cord that you pull out of the back and then the wheels. But it was very buoyant and it was made to take a good beating. And we would launch it off of things, obviously, as kids do. And I had these stairs going down to my basement. So we were launching the motorcycle. We were having a contest who could launch it the furthest off the stairs. We were marking where it would land at the bottom and all that. See, the fact that I remember this is just so weird, but here's why I remember it. And if you said, John, tell me some memories of when you were 7, 8 years old, very few and far between. Obviously, we don't remember that day in earth science class any more than we remember the spreadsheet we're banging out tomorrow, right? But in any case, on this one jump, Daniel thought his jump was better, and he said to me, which was an expression back then, but I never used it, which is getting to the point. He said, I creamed you, man. This is not a homoerotic tale of any sort. He said, I creamed you. I destroyed you, right? That's what I mean. I creamed you. Obviously, you guys heard that. This is in the 80s, all right? And now I said, not only remember if I won or not, but in my defense, I said, no, man, I creamed you, right? But now here's why I remember that. Because I would never use the word creamed. Okay. And he used it to me. Now, he wasn't being mean or anything. It was just how friends are, how buddies are. I destroyed you, man, right? I creamed you. But for me to say it back, it was such an internal false note at the time. This is before I knew the word cringe, but I cringed at myself because I was like, why would I say I creamed you? I don't even use that word. And not that he even noticed I said it. We probably went on and jumped the fucking motorcycle off the stairs 10 more times and just went on with the day. And it's funny that this relates to authenticity, which I wasn't even thinking about until I just said it. But because I hit some sort of weird, prideful, my ego came out and I hit some weird prideful internal note, and then I mimicked what he said, which is something I never really do. It stuck with me. And now, 30 something years later, I remember jumping that motor, but it's like the fact that I remember that. Now, again, that's obviously a much different thing than what I was talking about with the loving, meaningful memories that we carry in our souls and all that. Is kind of a silly side story, but listen, you do remember those little moments where you're embarrassed or feel awkward. In fact, I'm sure if I sat with a bunch of people and said, tell me your most vivid memories from, third grade, fourth grade, sixth grade, whatever, the majority would probably be times where people felt embarrassed and awkward, because that stuff, it would be both, right? It would be the embarrassed, awkward stuff, and it would be that girl you kissed at the skating rink. It would be that time you went skiing with your dad. It would be that baseball game you went to. It would be that concert you went to. It would be that time your friend pantsed you in geography class and everybody saw you know what I mean? Those are the things we remember, the things that elicit a feeling in us. So that's all. That's my wrap up. That's my cap up. Don't shy away from feeling things, because the things that we feel define what's in the moment, and then it defines what goes on from there. And that's a good segue. I want to talk about being in the present, living in the present moment. It's funny because saying that, and my whole life, that's been such a throwaway. Be in the present, live in the present, enjoy the moment. It's like one of those motivational taglines you would hear. And I always just took it in, and I think people often even mean it in a very surface way. I always took it in a very surface way. Like, yeah, of course, enjoy the moment. Appreciate things, yada, yada, of course. But it's really become this whole life mantra for me. It's really, for me, at the root and the core, it is the root and core of our whole existence. Our consciousness only exists in the present moment. We are only in one moment. But are our brains, are our thoughts and emotions, are those in the present moment? Usually not, right? So that's the point. That's why there's so much conflict and disconnect, in my opinion, with a lot of people, and with a lot of our struggle, and with me personally. If I look at any time where I'm feeling turmoil or conflicted or anything else, it is almost always not in the present moment, nor is it with anybody else. If you're sad, if you're depressed, those type of feelings, you're in the past, right? Unless I'm watching a puppy get run over in the exact moment, then I'm not sad about something that's happening right now. And even then, it becomes the past, right? Right after it happens, if I see a puppy get run over, and even 10 minutes later, I'm upset about that, I'm already upset about something that's not in the present moment. So that's a very quick present moment. But yeah, the sadness, the depression, stupid example, are past, those types of feelings. And the worry and the anxiety and all that, that's future. Again, unless I'm being mugged at gunpoint and I'm worried in the moment, that's a short moment. 10 minutes later, if I'm upset about it, it's the past. If I'm worried I'm going to be mugged again, that's the future. But am I okay in this moment? You're pretty much always okay in the moment. The stuff that you're ruminating about and having turmoil about and having inner conflict about, is it here in the room with you? Is it affecting you right this second, in this present moment? Or is the stuff that you're upset and conflicted about something that already happened, something that somebody already did or said, or something that you did or said that you regret? The regret stuff, that's all past. You don't regret things that haven't happened yet, obviously. Now, if I'm sitting here anxious and worried, well, what am I anxious and worried about? Is there something happening to me right now? No. But I'm anxious and worried about something that I think might happen, or something that I'm worried won't happen. But it has been, and it will always be, the present moment. Those were other present moments, and those will be other present moments. Time is something we invented as humans to make sense of societies and all these other constructs and transactions and interactions that we have, as a way of organizing things. We count laps around the sun as a way of organizing the deterioration of our own human bodies. But even without the spiritual, even from a scientific standpoint, if I saw this video the other day, it was showing the size of all the different stars. If you were revolving around one of those stars, you get into theory of relativity and all that kind of stuff. Time as we know it, the earthly human construct of time, only applies here. It's only something that affects us. It doesn't exist out in the universe. Where does our consciousness exist and our souls and all that? Are we only here on this little tiny rock that's less than 1 grain of sand in the world of infinite beaches that is the universe? Nothing has helped me more. I talked about this last week in relation to quieting my mind. Somebody asked methods I use to quiet my mind, and Nothing has helped me more. It's the recognition of it that helps the most, because there's the reason I'm ranting about it. I hope it helps a lot of you guys too, which is, and I tell it to my friends and family all the time when they come to me with their stuff. I go, is that in the present moment? Because if you're sitting there feeling like shit and you're feeling conflicted and all, really say that to yourself. Is this something that's affecting me in the present moment? Or am I concerned with something that already happened that's in the past? Am I concerned with something that hasn't happened yet that may or may not happen? But when it comes to this idea, the future is really what guides people. The fears and the hopes, right? The fears and the hopes of the future actually come in the same form, which is, it's not only guiding your thinking and it's not only consuming your thinking, but it's actually now affecting the way that you act and the way that you behave. But when you think about it, good or bad, for better or worse, because a lot of things end up way better than we thought, right? A lot of things end up worse. A lot of things do kind of end up around the same, but they're never exactly what we thought. Think of any outcome and then think about what your vision of it was prior to that. And again, may not be bad, maybe better, maybe worse, maybe just different. But I guarantee it's not the exact same. And then so when do we actually sit in the present moment and enjoy, or are we just in another future moment? There's actually I know I mention Alan Watts all the time. There's a really great, I'm going to play this. I shared a video one time, Alan Watts talk. It's a short one. He said a million similar things to this regard. And like I said, this guy articulates it all better than anybody. Let me play this video. If I'm going to pull this up, I think I'm probably allowed to play it. I don't know. I'm going to take a chance here. This is Alan Watts talking about in a short clip. And there's some music. Actually, like, it's from TikTok, so it's got like the background music. I kind of dig that when it's the right vibe. But he's talking about this idea and this construct of always being in the future, in our minds and in our thoughts and with our emotions. All right, here we go.
And then, suddenly, when you're about 40 or 45 years old in the middle of life, you wake up one day and say, huh? I've arrived. And by Jove, I feel pretty much the same as I've always felt. In fact, I'm not so sure that I don't feel a little bit cheated. Because you see, you were fooled. You were always living for somewhere where you aren't. And while, as I said, it is of tremendous use for us to be able to look ahead in this way and plan, there is no use planning for a future, which when you get to it and it becomes the present, you won't be there. You'll be living in some other future which hasn't yet arrived. And so in this way, one is never able actually to inherit and enjoy the fruits of one's action.
All right, there you go. So he articulated it. He said, the part where he said, you were always living for somewhere where you aren't, right? If you're in the future, you're always living for somewhere where you aren't. Because the place you end up, for better or worse, is never that place that you were in your head about that whole time. And so if then when you get to that place and it's better, worse, or different, well, you're doing that same cycle of now you're off in the future again. You're never actually enjoying the fruits of that moment. How did he say it? Yeah, he said it is of tremendous use to be able to look ahead and plan. That's what I was saying too. And a lot of that will actually free you up to experience all these amazing things. So if you say, well, I want to make a lot of money so that I can do X, Y, and Z, or so that I can raise a family, because the meaningful experiences for me are going to come from my family and my kids. And great, that's amazing. But then if that's your plan, now you have to now be in that moment and enjoy those moments. You can't be now on to the next. If you're always on to the next future thing, when are you actually emotionally invested in that moment on a deep soul level? Yeah, he said you're planning for a future that when you get to it and it becomes the present, you won't be there. It's just really well said, and it really hits at all the stuff that I've been trying to flush out in my own heart and mind and soul, and all the stuff I'm trying to articulate to you guys, because I just think it's universal stuff that really can be helpful to everybody in pretty much every aspect of our lives. This type of framework, this type of thinking of present moment. Look, there's enough stuff all day to take us out of the present moment, but when we have the ability to choose that, and we're not having some business transaction or some other type of thing that we have to plan for and take all these, like I was saying before, all these calculated preparations and everything else. We do enough of that in the world. When it comes to our private lives and our personal lives and our loved ones and our personal journeys, I really feel like we have to apply all this stuff more than anything. And listen, I've had a lot of people in my own life say to me that they need something to look forward to in order to feel a certain level of happiness. That's what I was saying. The hope and the worry all come from that same future place. It's just two different ends of the coin, but really both equally detrimental, in my opinion. There's actually a really good poem I read on this recently that I had read before and never really took in deeply in this way. I'm going to read that poem too from T.S. Eliot in a second. But these people that always need something to look forward to, that's the same trap. Here's a really double-stacked irony that I've shared before in relation to this past-future construct. And it's really, really common because I see a lot of people doing it, and I've done it too, which is, and here's where the hope can really be detrimental, which is this. Let's say you're in a situation where you're feeling really hopeful and excited about this specific vision of the future, right? And now, for whatever reason, that situation doesn't work out, whether it's a relationship thing or a career thing or something that you really wanted, and now it doesn't work out. Forgetting even the more cliche and true advice of not having high expectations because then you won't ever be as disappointed, yada, yada. It kind of is that on the surface, but here's where it becomes a much deeper thing. What you'll find is that in the moment when you're ruminating about the past, and yes, you might mourn the past in a more straight line kind of way. Oh, I really missed this thing, or oh, that was really sad, or oh, I wish I had that. Fine. But one of the hardest aspects when people are mourning the past is that they're mourning the vision of the future and the hope that they had in the past. They're stacking that future construct that doesn't exist on top of that past construct that no longer exists. Does that make sense? So you're thinking back to this past moment and you're going, I really miss feeling that way, but that feeling at the time was associated with this vision of the future. And so now you're really stacking all these constructs on top of each other, and none of them are in your present moment. Let me read this T.S. Eliot poem. It really drives at this in such an eloquent way. And I know I've read this poem before, but when I read it the other day and then I shared it on Twitter because I was like, wow, that really hits at exactly what I'm trying to talk about here. The name of the poem is Wait Without Hope by T.S. Eliot. I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. For hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. I almost want to read it again just to kind of drive him. Let me dig in on it a little bit. He's saying, I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. Wait without hope, wait without love. Hope would be hope of the wrong thing. Love would be love of the wrong thing. If you're sitting in that, this is all about being in that present moment. Don't apply the hope of what may come to be. Don't apply love of what may come to be. You're going to apply it to things that never come to be. It's going to be hope of the wrong thing. It'll be love of the wrong thing. Is it there in the moment? That's how I read that. Even he's saying faith. The faith and the love are in the waiting. Wait without thought, you are not ready for thought, right? You are not ready to think about these things. When you're ready to think about them, they will happen and they'll be, really, I feel like, now maybe I'm off. I'm no poetry analyzing, reading. What do they call those people who interpret poems? I don't know. But that's how I take it. So the darkness shall be the light and the stillness the dancing. Basically saying here, or how I take that, here in the stillness, in the dark, in the present, that is the light. That is the dancing. Simply being here is the blessing. The rest is all gravy. Good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, it's all a blessing, it's all gravy. And to sit and worry about that future hope and that future and all those things, no, apply it to the right here and now. Yeah, the present moment stuff for me, that's what it all boils down to. Just existing. And the idea that just existing is enough. Existing in this moment is enough. And that most of this torment that's inside of us is based on all these past and future regrets and worries and things that do not actually exist in this moment. You know, I've talked about, I'm somebody that's dealt with a lot of anxiety stuff and a lot of weird anxiety stuff that to this day will never make complete sense to me, right? It's just something that I've kind of grown accustomed to dealing with, and these are the kind of things that have helped it as much as anything else. But I'll give you an interesting example. I just got my hair trimmed the other day, which you probably can't even tell. I should do a hatless episode to kind of preserve this moment in time, because who knows how long I'm going to hang on to this. But it barely got trimmed, so you probably can't even tell. I'm not taking my hat off right now. But I was waiting. I got there early, and they were also running late at this hair salon place. And it's really small and constricted, and there's a lot of people. And yeah, to this day, if you put me in a small, crowded space with a lot of people, especially something structured where I have an appointment and I got to be there, so I can't just, I mean, I obviously can just get up and leave. I don't have to go to the hair, but I don't want to. I want to get my hair trimmed. And that would be the worst thing to do anyway, which is avoiding the things that make you a little anxious, and it's just a haircut. But listen, everyone's got their issues. I'm sure a lot of people could relate to this. A lot of people probably like, what the fuck? You can't sit in a hair salon? Listen, there are people who, from when I was younger, man, and I'm not ashamed to talk about this, which is funny, and that's actually a point I want to get to also. But yeah, I could be in line at a pharmacy or a grocery store and just feel like I was having a full-on heart attack. Restaurants, planes, all that type stuff, forget it. And those are still largely triggering for me, but not anywhere near in the same way that they used to be in the way I've come to manage. I should do a whole longer episode on this too, but for me personally, I think a big part of it is this feeling of just kind of it's a very claustrophobic thing for me. It's just being trapped, being controlled. Like I said before, and there are more extreme examples like planes and things, anywhere where I can't just get up and leave when I want to. Or if I'm in a situation where I have to notify somebody that I'm getting up and leaving, or it's a big deal if I get up and leave because it's like it's a work thing that I have this responsibility and I have to do it. I think it's a combination of that, and then also that I pick up on everybody's energy too much. And so when I'm sitting in this crowded salon and there's all these people around me, it's a sensory overload for me. I start having this involuntary fight or flight reaction. I start to feel very constricted. Now I could walk outside and immediately, it's gone. It's immediately gone. Okay, I'm free to go and do whatever I please. And all these people's energy isn't passing through me and stuff. I don't know. I think a lot of you could probably relate to that in some degree. But the reason this was interesting at the salon, and without even really thinking about it, and this is a woman I had been to before a long time ago, but she remembered me. And I sat down in the chair and she's like, how are you or whatever? And I said to her, actually, she brought up, she goes, I don't know where everybody went. It was crowded in here a minute ago. And so I go, yeah, it was making me uncomfortable. I'm glad it cleared out. Like I can breathe now. And that's not something it might sound like that's not something I ever would have said 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe 10, but not when I was younger. And it might sound like such a small thing. And then she followed up with an inquiry, and I went further to say, oh yeah, I get like really uncomfortable. And now I had just been feeling uncomfortable. And now me telling her that, I felt even more relief. Then I was just totally calm and at ease. Because the thing that used to be the hardest, especially as a guy, I think, is that idea of, I have to kind of just be stoic and tell. What if people think something's wrong? What if I come off weak and sick and weird and these people think I'm a weirdo? So it's just like, I don't know if it's partly my personal evolution and growth, and I think society, which is kind of a double-edged sword in a way, has obviously evolved and grown a lot as well. When I was a kid, if I was feeling that way, let's say I was 13 or 16 or 19, and I was with some friends and we were out somewhere and I was feeling that kind of way, panicky and constricted, and it was too crowded, and I was like, I'd have never said it. I'd have sat there. If you asked all my closest friends growing up, they wouldn't have even been able to tell you that I had that issue. Maybe one or two, maybe some family, but almost none of the people, even the people I was closest with, I never said anything to them, which is really bizarre for me to think about. And again, I don't know if that was my personal maturity and pride and weird stuff at the time, or partly society accepting all these things, because that was, I say, a double-edged sword. Everyone has anxiety and depression now, right? A third of the population is on SSRIs and benzos and all kinds of stuff. So it's like there's that side of it too, and maybe we took it a little too far. And listen, I think going back to the whole past, present, the worry, and everyone's gonna have that's not a glitch in life, right? That kind of generalized worry and anxiousness about future stuff, or sadness and depression about past stuff and all that. That's just built into life. So of course, if someone says I have anxiety, they're not lying, because find me a human that doesn't have that generalized type of anxiety and worry that I've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. Find me a human that doesn't have some sadness and regrets and things like that about the past. So I think that's where it becomes a little bit, especially when you start medicating. It's one thing for people to identify with it, which can be healthy and stuff. Again, if you're expressing things that are real to you, that can often be a very healthy, beneficial thing. But you start medicating people. And this is a thought I had a lot, and this is a conversation I had recently. You know, a ton of people I meet tell me that I'm the most ADD person ever. ADHD, ADD, whatever. That wasn't a thing when I was a kid. I know when I was a kid, I couldn't sit and do homework. I couldn't sit and study for a test. I always just felt I was lazy in that regard. But if it came to something I was interested in, I could just sit there and do it endlessly for hours and hours. And they've done studies with these ADD kids where, yeah, you sit there and you give them math problems and stuff. They're fidgeting within 2 seconds, but you give them a Fortnite game and they could sit still for 6 hours and concentrate intently without being antsy at all because they're actually enjoying the experience. And it's stimulating for them in a way that the other thing isn't. So then I often think, well, do so many people need to be medicated all day? People think, I've been told that I would benefit a lot from ADD medication, for example. But what's broken in that regard? Am I broken? Or it's the wrong word maybe, but is it me or is it society? Maybe I'm not supposed to be able to sit and do a spreadsheet and feel comfortable with that. And maybe that's just not my general makeup and composition and where my heart and soul are at and these things that don't get explained by science, right? Because maybe it would work, but if I need a pill so that I can sit and do a certain type of thing, I could tell you that if I had to sit and do a spreadsheet right now or write this really long, detailed email or something, yeah, I would feel really antsy and ADD-like, whatever that is, while I'm sitting there trying to do it. I don't feel like that when I'm doing this pod. So if you don't feel like that with everything and you just feel like that about doing things that are constricting or that you're not passionate about, is that an illness? You always hear people didn't have this back. Forget back in the day. I'd like to do a study today on people that work on farms with cattle and stuff. Do they have ADD to the same extent? Are they being diagnosed with ADD and on medication to the same extent that people are in office environments, for example? If you're out there working the farm all day and tending to the livestock, do you feel that same as you would if you were in front of a computer screen and stuck on a phone all day and stuff that doesn't coincide? And by the way, I think there are people, I know them in my life, they don't feel that way about doing an Excel spreadsheet, or they don't feel that way about it. They kind of enjoy it. But that's what I mean. Maybe we're not all the same. Maybe the things that hit at us aren't all the same. And maybe it's not necessarily an illness. And even with the level of anxiety and stuff that I describe with myself, even being the guy that would have to leave the store because I was in line and I felt like I was having a fucking heart attack, even me, I don't view that as an illness. And if other people experience similar and other people experience way worse versions of it, my shit is way far away from what's even the worst. So I don't want it to sound like I got a worse version of anything. And that's kind of my point. I don't even consider that thing an illness. I think that is where a lot of the progress is made, is kind of accepting and embracing all the parts of you. And that's just a part of me. And I'm not ashamed of it. And just the same way I was openly able, without even thinking about it, to talk to the haircut lady. Yeah, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I'd have been like, just be open and honest about it. I really feel like I would have had a much easier time getting through a lot of stuff had I simply just removed that stigma and level of shame. And yeah, so what? So I think it's probably great in that regard. I think there is probably some young version of John who's sitting there in class right now, breaking out a sweat and feeling sick and not understanding why. And if he was able to even just turn to his best buddy and be like, man, I feel so constricted and uncomfortable sitting here, his buddy would be like, yeah, man, me too. Like, I totally get it. But yeah, even if he wouldn't have said something like that, just the saying it out, just the feeling of this isn't something I have to hide. And this really kind of touches it too, what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode and in past episodes, which is it's the hiding stuff away and the denying things and the pushing it down and just saying, I'm going to be stoic and push through this. And yes, you could do it. Like I said, I went 20 something years with the closest people in my life, not even knowing that I had this type of stuff going on. But it's a much freer, more peaceful, more authentic existence to just kind of own your stuff and really, truly to remove any shame associated with it. That's like the biggest part. I talked about shame recently, but that's the biggest part of loving and accepting yourself. not feeling ashamed, not having all that unhealthy pride and ego and all that, and worrying about how you're going to be perceived. And then bringing it back to the being in the present moment, that applies so heavily to all this stuff too. Again, I talked about the anxiety and worry. When you get specifically into anxiety attacks, where your body is now physically, physiologically, whatever, where you're now can actually be physically sick or debilitated because of these thoughts. So if I use that salon as an example, not that I was but there's many examples when I was younger where I would have actually been physically ill, or I would have just left to relieve myself of that feeling, right? The present moment stuff applies all day there too, because again, it's what is in the here and now. I'm always okay in the present moment. Whatever I'm thinking, even on a subconscious level, even if I'm sitting there going, I don't really get why I have this prehistoric fight or flight mechanism about being in a closed space with a lot of people and their energy and stuff. But whatever it is, it's not based in the reality of the present moment. It's based in some other place or time. And then this cyclical thing happens, which is now you start, and anybody with anxiety understands exactly what I'm talking about here, which is now you just start to worry about the worry itself. The anxiety becomes about the anxiety. So when you start avoiding certain triggers and situations and not partaking in things, it's always, what if I feel that way that I felt that other time? And now you just become worried about feeling that way. But why were you feeling that way in the first place? What were you actually even worried about? And that can be buried so deep in you under so many different layers. And if you can get to that stuff and release it, that's the ultimate. But you can improve and deal with it and pretty much solve it simply by putting it just into that perspective without even fully understanding it. And so, yeah, tip of the week, tip of the show, that's what I would just implore everybody. It's what I tell everyone in my own life, because I do look around and see most everybody dealing with something. And if you're going to repeat a mantra to yourself, if you're going to tell yourself anything to alleviate some of that stuff, try the present moment. Try reminding yourself, this is what's here and now in this present moment. It's me and nature and God and the universe. And all that other stuff rolling around in my head is in some other place and time and either doesn't exist or it will never exist. And so now why am I giving my real emotions and thoughts to this thing and allowing it to define my existence in the here and now? Okay, I want to get to, I'm sure next week I'm going to have a ton of follow-up on that, but I want to get to my top 5 guitarists for the end of the list. I'm listing my lead guitarists. I'll save bass players for another time. That's a whole nother thing. Guys, you can hit me up on Twitter. If there's any lists, I should do listener suggested lists. If there's like a top 5, something you want to hear me rank for you of my personal favorites, JohnCat79 on Twitter. And y'all should follow me on TikTok too. I'm back on TikTok. Who knows? You'll probably follow me on there and then I won't have any videos. But for now, if you want just like video clips of some of the content from this show, I've been uploading to TikTok most days. And I don't know. I have a lot of problems with that app. That's for another conversation. Coming in from 5 to 1, I'm going to start with my number 5. These are my personal. This is not a technical, who's the best technical guitarist. Obviously, that gets factored in. But it's my personal favorites and really who I think is the best. To be honest, you know what? I factored in technical probably with this list more than I do. If I just did personal favorites, now that I think about it, I would have had like Mike McCready from Pearl Jam and all that. So I did actually factor in skill level a bit here and how iconic these people are and so forth. Okay, this is one I didn't think would make the list, but when I was putting it together, I was just thinking about how impressed I've been. I share and I watch so many live performances, and Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, who's the lead singer. Also, it's very rare that a lead guitarist is also the lead singer, so he was unique in that regard, and he was actually probably even more, or he was much more critically acclaimed and touted for his guitar skills than his vocal skills. But when I watched live performances of his Brothers in Arms and all, it's like, I think I was definitely swayed with this pick and a couple others, now that I think about it, of also being a singer, because to me that's extra impressive and really allows them to express themselves in a different kind of way when they're able to sing and not just play the guitar. Okay, coming in number 4, same deal, singer and guitarist. I don't want to sit here and pretend like I'm a huge fan of the music, and I think it's kind of like, listen, I love Nirvana too, and I put Nirvana in this category, which is, as much as I love them, I think the iconicism, that's not a word, whatever, them being iconic kind of overrates them in a way. And I hate to say that because it's like, yeah, I love Nirvana, but they're also a little overrated. Number 4, Jimi Hendrix. I love Jimi. And I'm talking about as a guitarist. But if you're just looking at the library and the music or whatever, I'd say it's a little overrated, the music in the library. If you're talking about best guitarist and just being so revolutionary and making sounds with that thing that other people were not making. And in fairness, that is what made him so iconic. And I think it sounds like I'm being unfair and I'm bashing the guy that I just put on my top 5 list. But coming in number 4, Jimi Hendrix did it in a completely different way with a totally different style, as soulful and skilled as anybody, and was just literally playing straight from his soul, which same as number 3. Coming in number 3, John Frusciante, Red Hot Chili Peppers, OG lead guitarist, did many stints on and off with them as somebody who's struggled with mental health and addiction and things like that as well. But yeah, you talk about a guy that plays straight from his soul. I'm trying to think. There's a performance I share a ton of Chili Peppers. I think it was like Don't Forget Me or something. You watch John Frusciante play. He's number 3 on my list. If I was listing most underrated guitarist, he'd be number 1 by far. It's one thing to be technical, and I don't even know how to play guitar, and I have all the respect in the world for people that are doing that, but you can watch certain people and they're pouring it out from a place that's coming from that reality I keep referring to, whatever that stuff is. He's pouring it out there and he's sharing it with you. In addition to having amazing skills and sounding different than other people sound. Coming in number 2, this is my most nostalgic pick by far and just covers all the bases for me as far as guitarists goes. Slash, Guns N' Roses. Also highly underrated. Also people think of kind of like caricature-y, but nobody was more iconic than Slash. Nobody just shredding solo after solo. And just, yes, you factor in the dark curly hair and the face and the lean back and the swag for sure has a lot to do with all that. But as talented as any of these dudes, and again, my personal favorites, GNR being a top 1, 2, or 3 band in my life, a huge portion of my favorite guitar solos are Slash solos. Coming in number 1, this will be an obvious one, especially if you do follow my Twitter or whatever, because I said it the other day. It's Eric Clapton, and it's not even close. And every video I watch of this guy, I just go, oh yeah, there's a different level. What I said in the tweet, I said there's Eric Clapton, and there's everybody else. And now this is where I will talk about being technical, even though I don't understand guitar. I don't know how you can be that tight and perfect. I just shared a clip of the song Old Love. And he's just like, it's like an 8-minute clip, and it's like the first 3 minutes are him singing, and then just 5 minutes of him just shredding. But it's so tight. It's like, this is what I said. How could it be that tight and then still that silky smooth? I don't know how he does that. Because if you look at a guy like Frusciante or Jimmy, and they are just shredding with their soul, and it's like, it's obviously, even to a layman, it's like, all right, that stuff's technically not perfect, but it's got so much emotion behind it. Clapton's hitting you with the same level of emotion, and he's still technically perfect, but he doesn't come off as like tight and constricted and rehearsed. He's pouring out his soul, and yet it's still fucking flawless. And I don't understand how somebody can embody and combine both of those things. My other favorite performance I shared is when Clapton covered, it was for the George Harrison tribute, he covered While My Guitar Gently Weeps he had Paul McCartney on stage playing piano and singing backup. Ringo was up there, Harrison's son, all these legends. And actually, Clapton played, little known or well known fact to Beatles fans, Clapton played on the album for the album version of My Guitar Gently Weeps, but went uncredited. George Harrison, the story goes, brought him in to shred that solo because Harrison, who's a great guitarist in his own right, didn't even feel like he could do it justice. So he had Clapton come in and overlay his own solo. And then that didn't come out, I guess, till many years later or whatever. But then Clapton, and this one that I shared, it was at the Harrison tribute after Harrison had passed. So Clapton was lead singing it and shredding. And again, the solos this man does, I'm not going to keep gushing about the dude. dick eating, as my friend would say. I'm not going to keep dick eating this guy, but he's clearly number one. Everyone else is a far 2 through 5, much as I love Slash and all these dudes. And then look, shout out, like I said, Mike McCready before, everyone, Santana and Prince. And you got, obviously Floyd and Zeppelin, always Gilmore, and Jimmy Page always gets a lot of love. I made the correlation before. It's very true to me. If I look at the delineation that followed, Guns N' Roses to me carried the Led Zeppelin torch. To me, there's just a lot of parallels in the style, in the type of fans they attracted. And then even between kind of Axl Rose and Robert Plant, both being the divas that they are and were. And then even Slash and Page, a lot of parallels and just the style. And then for me, Pearl Jam kind of carried that Pink Floyd torch. And I've even heard Eddie Vedder. By the way, you got to call him Ed if you're a real PJ fan. I've even heard Ed Vedder discussing that as well, that he kind of wanted to be more Floyd or whatever. But anyway, total side note, there's my top 5 favorite guitarists all time. I really hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I will be back soon with another one for you, I promise. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. I hope you're all having a beautiful week and a nice upcoming weekend. I love y'all, appreciate y'all, and I will see y'all soon. Be good.